Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to talk about some skills and some things that you might want to know and you might want to start to practice if you want to go into classical studies specifically, but also if you want to go into history, English literature, the humanities, overall area of study. This applies basically all across the board for all humanities, because classical studies, although it isn't popular in Canada as popular as it is in certain countries in Europe, the UK for example, it is a very versatile degree and it has taught me a lot of necessary skills that I wouldn't only need in everyday life, but in other classes that don't entirely pertain to classical studies. So, without further ado, let's get started. Roll the intro. First, sort of things first, this is sort of backtracking. But what is the whole classical studies versus classics versus classical civilization? What is this? So classics in Canada refers to the route you take if you want to focus on ancient Greek and Latin as languages and reading and writing and speaking them. You might want to go into translation later. You might want to be able to just translate the Odyssey and the Iliad with more ease. Classical studies and classical civilizations, on the other hand, is literally everything else. No, I'm kidding. I mean, obviously, as a classics major, you can take courses that pertain to the different subject areas: history, philosophy, society, myths, and everything sort of in between. But you have to take ancient Greek or Latin. Whereas in classical studies and classical civilizations, it differs between the two depending on what country you're in. In Canada, I'm in classical studies. I think in the UK and more so in Europe, it's classical civilizations. And classical civilizations, I think, also refers to sort of like Egypt as well. Whereas classical studies is very much focused on ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Yes, that's the biggest sort of difference. I have taken, as I said, ancient Greek, and I just didn't like how we were taught it. So the first thing I'm gonna start with is familiarize yourself with the history. So this is, of course, classical studies specific, but this also has to do with English literature, general history. If there's like another specific history area that you are studying, familiarize yourself with the history. It will make everything so much easier. For classical studies, you'd want to know the important dates. You'd want to know the important figures in every sort of aspect of classical studies. In military, in politics, in philosophy, in poetry, in literature in general. So if you want to get into classical studies and you want to have a head start ahead of your peers, ahead of the people in your class, because not everyone will be a classical studies major, familiarize yourself with the history. How did I get started? Well, I got started with Percy Jackson, and that introduced me to the myths of the ancient Greek and Roman world, as well as the myths of the ancient Egyptian world, and then later on other cultures through the Rick Riordan Presents imprint. And then I read books like The Secret History, I read the Odyssey. There are plenty of Greek mythology retellings. There are plenty of amazing non-fiction books available. So familiarize yourself with the history. Famous places, artworks, disaster periods, disaster eras, famous groups of people and what they were called and what they called others. Most famous texts, mythology obviously is very, very important. So yes, familiarize yourself with the area that you are studying in. And this also applies to humanities in general, as well as things like history, English literature. For English literature, for example, you'd want to have read the classics, Oscar Wilde, Charles Dickens. You might have wanted to read Shakespeare. You might have wanted to read Mary Shelley, you know, all the classic works to familiarize yourself with the period that you are going to study and what these classic works tell us about the period as well. Because literature at the time is often a reflection of society. So, that's the first tip. The second tip is watch documentaries, watch YouTube videos, watch books. The internet in this day and age is your best friend. Okay, once you hit university, you'll have access to academic articles, but if you're first year, those might be a little bit more intimidating, and you might not have the right amount of resources or the right understanding of how to use these research papers to your advantage and how to read them properly and understand them fully. That is a job that you can go to the research assistants at your library for. Use advantage of your library. I cannot implore you enough. Use advantage of your library. So, watch documentaries, watch YouTube videos, read books, listen to audiobooks as you're commuting to university. Help you so much. A few of my favorite things to peruse and watch and read. One channel is Moon Inc. I did a collab with Erica. She's a wonderful, wonderful person. She graduated in classical studies and she runs a YouTube channel all about the ancient world. If you're reading the Odyssey and you're like, what is going on? She has a fantastic series on her YouTube channel that breaks down every book down to its core. Might be helpful. Another one, she also has beginner book recs, which mythology retellings you should read, where you can start with mythology retellings and sort of the in-between. Another thing is documentaries. I myself haven't watched a lot of documentaries, but one I remember watching in English literature, or maybe it was English class, I don't remember, was Delphi, the Belly Button of the Ancient World, which is a fairly popular documentary, and you can find it on YouTube for free. It's pretty cool because Delphi is a major intersection, major point, major place in the ancient world, and the site of Delphi, of the Oracle of Delphi, is still very popular today. And appears in like several plays and stuff, like Oedipus Rex. So, check those out. I will have history videos in the future, probably. I'm gonna start a series soon called Archeo News. I have a series on my Instagram already, so those are all Instagram posts, but I'm going to start it via YouTube. So please look forward to that. As for nonfiction, there's a lot to choose from. One that I bought recently is called Persians by Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones. He is a professor, and Erica actually has an interview with him. And Erica's someone that barely knew anything about the Persians. I'm half Persian, so I know quite a bit. But I picked it up and I started reading it. I'm really enjoying it, and his writing style is fantastic. It's really to the point. It's really concise. You're not confused with all the jargon, with all the names, with all the dates. It's really precise. Another one I would recommend is probably The Silk Roads by, put it up here. But this one sort of breaks down the history of the Silk Roads, which consists of, you know, the road that connected the west to the east being China as the eastmost country at the time. And my country was actually part of the Silk Roads and sort of that history, and it's really good. I read about like maybe 25% and it was really interesting. So yes, so do some research, go check Erica's channel. She has some really good recommendations. Definitely check that out. Next point is learn to read critically and annotate your books. I kid you not. Do not tell me, do not come to me being like, I don't annotate my text. You're gonna need to learn how to annotate. It's because otherwise it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to really understand what's going on. Don't be afraid to annotate. If you want to do it on the computer, that's cool. But I highly recommend finding a secondhand copy of the book that you're reading. Save the fancy one that you bought at the bookstore for as display on the shelf. Buy that secondhand copy, which might have marks in it already, and annotate it. put in your notes, put in your questions, put in your thoughts. Sticky tab it, put in sticky notes, write in it. I literally, my copy of the Odyssey, while not heavily annotated, I underline things. Okay? You see this? I write things in it. And this is a copy I bought at the bookstore, actually. Not a secondhand bookstore, but a bookstore. This cost me like $22. So I'm not afraid to annotate, but then again, I annotate quite a bit. But annotations, don't listen to the people on the internet that are like, I don't get why people annotate. Do whatever you want. Okay? But learning to read critically and annotating could help with developing this skill. Learning to read critically is really important because the ancient world is so big. And honestly, you're not going to get through it all in this lifetime. You know, you can't get through all of it in one lifetime. You'd need minimum 5 lifetimes. So learn to read between the lines. Learn to understand the context of what's happening in the historical context as well, not just in the poetic one. Learn to understand how the certain words that are used in the translations refer to the time that the book was translated. Why is this author using this word as a translation as opposed to this author, modern one, more recent translation, using this word? What is the connotation here? What is the progress of evolution for said word in English? Because there are many translations of the Odyssey. This is bothering me. Boop. This is the Penguin Classics one. I think this is one of the first. The most recent one is the Odyssey by Emily Wilson, which blew up because she is the first woman to have translated the Odyssey. Every other translation has been by men. And that also changes things. So learn to read between the lines, learn to read critically, learn to understand the several contexts, the several layers, because that will help you tremendously. And this doesn't just go for books. This goes for art pieces. This goes for documentaries as well. This goes for YouTube videos. This goes for non-fiction books. This goes for fiction books, because what if I love the Odyssey and the portrayal of Penelope in this, but I don't love the portrayal of Penelope in House of Odysseus? Because it's a different person and it's their take on the ancient story. Also, texts like the Odyssey are often widely accessible. Definitely keep in mind that the different translations will probably have different words used for different instances and different eras of translation. The next thing, and this is a question that is often asked, especially by newcomers, is Latin and ancient Greek useful to learn? And honestly, that's your prerogative. That's your choice to think about it and be like, is it worth learning Latin and ancient Greek? If you're like me and speak French, which is a Latin-based language, Latin may be useful. If you speak Greek, ancient Greek might be useful, and it might be easier to learn ancient Greek than it would be to learn Latin. So I, for example, took ancient Greek in first year, and I just didn't like how the class was structured because it was completely asynchronous. We did not have meetings. There were no, meetups or anything, and I would have preferred the sort of talking to the teacher and actually asking questions in real time rather than discussing it in the group chat, being like, hey, the professor isn't giving us proper answers, what do we do? And trying to figure it out with my classmates who also don't know anything. So it's a constant debate, but if you want to go further into classics, if you want to do a master's, if you want to do a PhD, it is best to learn whatever language you're leaning more towards, whatever area you're leaning more towards. If it's Roman, you learn Latin. If it's Greeks, you learn ancient Greek. And hey, if you learn modern Greek, that's 2 languages on your belt, under your belt. Under your belt? So it's definitely your choice, but it also makes understanding the text easier, and you can apply your own translations to the text. So you could use a word that you might think is better and translate it your way. So yes, and master's and PhD may require the knowledge because there could be like a test where you have to translate certain parts of a text, and you have to do it as well as you can to pass. So there could be oral exams as well. So you never really, of course, that depends on the program, it depends on the university, but if you are going specifically into classical studies, going to a master's and a PhD, it is highly recommended that you do follow through with either one language or both. Who knows? Maybe you're just like really good with languages and you pick up really fast. Ancient Greek was a mess. I'm going to learn it myself and then find classes online. I have a school in mind. So number 5 is citations. This is something that every student still struggles with, no matter how many times a librarian has come into my class. I always get questions from my classmates being like, did I cite this correctly? Because they know I'm a classical studies major and they don't really know how to cite it properly. There are different citation styles, obviously, in general. APA, MLA, whatever other one they've thought of. But when it comes to ancient texts, they are presented differently. So while you have House of Odysseus, for example, have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and you just probably put down the page number, it differs from edition to edition for classics, because page 155 in this edition is going to be different than page 155 in the other edition that I have, or the older Penguin Classic edition that I got for Christmas. So the way you cite things in the classics world is that you take the book, which is essentially a chapter. So you take the book, so in this case book 3, and then you take the line, so let's say it's line 80, right? I'm quoting Telemachus, who's talking to Nestor, one of his father's friends who he fought with in the Trojan War. And I'm quoting specifically Nestor, son of Neleus, great glory of the Greeks. You ask where we come from, I will tell you. We are from Ithaca, which lies at the foot of Mount Neon. I'm quoting that. So the lines would be 79 to 81. So I would quote it as 379 to 81, and then probably like the Odyssey or something like that. So something similar. So you do book and then you do line. Sometimes your professors will be like, use the Roman numerals. Sometimes your professors will say it's fine to use the sort of regular numbers that you would use in everyday life. So your professors will probably explain what they want in terms of citation, but just keep in mind that it is different than just citing the page number, because the page number in this one will be different than the page number in another edition. So it's not the same across the board, and that is important to note. The next one is translation. So as you can see, I have the Odyssey here, and then I have another copy somewhere. So I have the Penguin Classics translation by Evie Ryu, and then I have the Robert Fagel's translation. So these two, while it is the same story, they are different translations, and by different people with different mindsets at the time. This one was first published in 1946. This one was first published in 1946. This one, on the other hand, was published. This one was first published in 1996. 1996. There's a significant time difference between this one and this one. And the biggest difference is that this is prose, whereas this is more of the poetry, because the Odyssey is an epic poem, and it is in, I forget what the word was, but I'll put it on the screen. But it's in a specific rhythm, in ancient Greek and Greek, and which is difficult to portray in English because it's just not the same. The cadences of the words in English differ from the Greek words. So this is prose, this is poetry. Prose meaning it reads like a story. It reads like a novel. Poetry meaning it reads like a poem. See, the thing is, the chapter titles are the same, the book titles are the same, the progression of the story is the same. It's just that the translations are obviously different. They will use different words for certain scenes. Specifically, some scenes do have more arguments as to the word choice, just because it is not the same view of the specific terms right now as it was back then, and it's a whole thing. But yes, so there's translations. If you're confused, the best ones to start with are probably Penguin Classics and Oxford Classics. There's also the Loeb Classical editions that have both the Greek and the English side by side, but that's probably best when you can actually read the ancient Greek. It's pretty cool to be able to translate parts of it. Profs might prefer different versions. I had a prof that preferred the Richard Lattimore version, I think it was called, and I had a prof that preferred this version. And then I had a prof that preferred another version of the Iliad completely. I had a prof that wanted us to read the Emily Wilson translation. So it all differs from the prof as well. It will differ for you. I love this version. Not so much this, because I found the wording to be a little bit difficult to get through, but that's just me. Again, this differs. Next thing is, don't be afraid to ask questions. As I said earlier, the ancient world is huge. You will need several lifetimes to get through it all and to understand it completely and fully and truly. And that's difficult to say that anyone will, because things change all the time. We think a warrior is a man, but it actually ends up being a woman, because, despite, everything pointing to the skeleton being a man, actually woman. And it's just, everything changes. It's constantly changing. It's constantly being translated. Things are constantly being found. So there's a lot of information that will come at you. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You can DM me. You can ask your professors. They'll probably be so happy to answer any questions that you have, because that's their jobs. You're paying them money. Use it to your advantage. Also, librarians. There's probably a specific subject librarian at your university. Go find them and ask them questions, as many as you can, in whatever allocated time they'll give you. Even if the question sounds stupid, you're like, okay, we're talking about like Aphrodite. Who the hell is Aphrodite? Please give us some context. Ask it, because no question is stupid. You're starting out. No question is stupid. We don't expect you to know everything right away. The next skill you will need is probably one of the most important ones, and the way I sort of built it myself was talking to a camera and doing YouTube and getting used to the sound of my own voice, because oh boy, when I tell you guys, when I first started this channel, I hated the editing part. I could not be done with it. And if you compare my recent videos to my first videos, there is such a significant change in the way I present myself and my background, and also the way I edit. In the first few videos, there are a lot more there are a lot more pauses that I didn't bother editing because I couldn't stand the sound of my own voice. However, now I'm more used to it, and I also work a library job, so that also helps with talking to people, interacting with people, and public speaking. So that comes into the question of, what is the skill I need? Public speaking, arguments, talking to other people, arguing with other people, obviously politely. You need to know how to speak in front of people. This is not negotiable. You need to know how to interact with your peers. This is not a major where you can be a loner. this is a major where you are probably required to speak in class, you're required to participate, you may have study groups that you might want to form, but you can't do all of that if you can't interact with people. If you're someone who's a self-proclaimed loner or self-proclaimed complete introvert, you will have a difficult time. You can't go for 3-4 years without interacting with anyone. You're gonna have to interact with people. And public speaking is the way to get over your fears, honestly. Honestly, in true ancient Greek philosophy fashion, you're gonna have to figure it out. Practice in front of a mirror. I know it sounds cringy. Practice in front of the camera, because if you can look into the camera and have the minimal amount of pauses, you will be able to look a person in the eye and speak smoothly. Obviously, there's also the thing about the cadence of speech, the speed you're talking at. Don't talk too fast, don't talk too slow. Talk at a regular pace. Don't be nervous, don't be shy. You know, that also comes with practice. So if you speak with people, make friends. They will help you. They will be your biggest supporters as well as your biggest critics. But make friends. Talk to the professors. Don't be shy. One step at a time. You have time, but maybe not a lot of it. The next one is analysis. You have to be able to analyze things. Why did Amy Rio choose this word? Why did Robert Fagles choose this word? Why is it that in this book, in this retelling, Medusa is portrayed as this, whereas in the other retelling, she is portrayed as this? Why is it that people confuse the Roman and Greek versions of a myth? You know, why did, you know, you have to learn how to analyze things, not only from a personal perspective, but from a historical perspective. If we find a skeleton at an archaeological site that we thought was a man, because everything else leads to it being a man, the sword, the helmet, the type of body armor, but it turns out to be a woman, what could have been the story of that? What does it say now about that society where this woman warrior lived? Who was this? Did she disguise herself as a man to go into the war? Was she revered by the citizens of the city, of the town, of wherever they were living? Was there actually no barriers for the women to join the men in the war? Were women also considered warriors in their own right and held to the same esteem as the men? So just thinking about those questions is a good thing to develop your analysis skills. And reading nonfiction will also help you build your analysis skills, because you may have a certain perspective on a certain ancient text, but you read a couple of different nonfiction texts pertaining to this specific ancient text, and your perspective might change, or you might just despise the book completely. So, with that being said, I will list off a couple of resources that you can use for further research. Perseus.tufts.edu is for ancient texts for free. Loeb Classical Library, if your university has access to it, take advantage. This is all the Loeb Classical Library editions, hence the one with the Greek or Latin on one side and the English translation on the other, Tom Holland and Mary Beard are two incredibly popular ancient world authors. They have really good, sort of straight to the point, concise, beginner-friendly nonfiction novels. Open University has a sort of bite-sized courses for ancient Greek and Latin and ancient Greek history and Roman history and stuff, so you can check that out if you're unsure of whether or not to pursue a classical studies degree. Center for Hellenic Studies, Institute for Classical Education, and HM Classics Academy are all sites where you can attend classes and lectures on different topics. Center for Hellenic Studies, I'm not entirely sure what that one exactly is, but I'm sure they have different resources and stuff, especially to start learning languages, for example. So, Institute for Classics Education is run by my friend Irene. I will post her Instagram as well as link it down below. She organizes different seminars and different lectures on various different topics of the ancient world. And HM Classics Academy offers ancient Greek and Latin courses per term, and I've only heard good things because it is actually a Zoom class, which is what I would have preferred in first year. So yes, and the last thing I have is, what are the job prospects? This seems like such a useless degree. As I said in the beginning of the video, classical studies is an incredibly versatile degree that gives you so many different skills that are so useful in not only different areas of study, but in your future work opportunities and everyday life. As I said, it has helped me get out of my shell more. It has helped me analyze better. It has helped me learn how to read texts properly and read academic texts as well without feeling like my mind is going to explode because the texts are so long and so boring. So, here are the job prospects. Librarian. I'm an LSA. I'm a library services assistant. This is a student job at my university library, and honestly, being a classical studies major is very helpful. A historian, if you go into a master's or PhD. History teacher or professor. For history, high school teacher, you don't need a master's, I don't think, but for a professor, you need a master's and or a PhD further on. Museum curator or museum guide, you need a master's in museum studies, I believe. You can work for a nonprofit. I interned at a nonprofit ancient world organization called SASA. I'll link that down below. You can go into the publishing industry and help with translations. You can become an archaeologist, but again, that requires a master's preferably. You can become a scholar, master's, PhD. You can become a writer because your writing skills are going to skyrocket. You will know how to manipulate words so incredibly well. Writer, journalist. You can go into law, you can go into politics, you can go into religion because you have the base for all of those. Law and politics and philosophy as well, and religion all basically started in the ancient world, okay? Christianity started during the Roman times. So, you can literally go into religion, you can go into law, you can go into politics, you can go into philosophy. Having that background is going to put you at such an advantage because you will be able to think like no other person. Unless they, of course, have a classical studies degree, but that's unlikely because, especially in Canada, classical studies is not very big as it is in the UK, for example. So, that is it for this very long video, which I have 4 clips of because my phone ran out of storage halfway through. I hope you enjoyed this chaotic video. Let me know if you have any questions below, if you have any additional tips and tricks. And let me know what your majors are, what you want to go into, what you want to be when you grow up. Let me know. And of course, follow the socials, like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me a lot. And that's it. I will see you in the next one. Happy reading and studying.